What's up, and welcome back to Linode. I'm Josh, one of your developer advocates, and today I wanted to walk you guys through installing Forgejo on Ubuntu server using Docker. Now, if you guys haven't heard of Forgejo, it's a lightweight software forge that can help you manage software projects with ease. And by installing it on your own server, you can ensure that your code and data remains under your control, and you can have more privacy and security. And throughout this tutorial, I'll show you guys how to install Forgejo on Ubuntu server using Docker. And I'll guide you through each step of the installation process, including installing Docker, creating the container for Forgejo, and configuring and testing to make sure everything is working correctly. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get started with installing Forgejo on your Ubuntu server using Docker. Now, before I get started, in case I didn't explain this, Forgejo is a soft fork of Gitea, which is a popular self-hosted Git service. And Forgejo basically came about because Gitea was actually purchased by an organization. And in order to keep the project going with the community and under an organization that's nonprofit and exclusively free software, Forgejo was created. Now, right here, I have Linode open. This is my backend once you log into it. But I wanted to show you guys that you still have that option to use Gitea. If you go under the marketplace and then search for apps, you can search, and Gitea is still there. So you can install a server using Gitea, and I'm sure a Forgejo version will pop up sooner or later. So let's go through the install. Alright, so I'm logged into my Ubuntu 22.04 server, which is where we'll install Forgejo on. And just to give you a little overview of what I've done already, I created a user with sudo privileges named Josh. It doesn't matter about the account because we'll be using a system account that we'll create throughout this process in order to run that Docker container for us using Docker Compose. And the first thing we want to do is install Docker Compose because that's the main application that we need installed on the system. And Ubuntu doesn't come with Docker Compose installed by default, so we have to run through that install. And the first thing you want to do is update the system. So sudo apt update, and this will refresh those repositories, make sure we get the latest and greatest package when we decide to install Docker Compose. And you also want to make sure you update the system, make sure it's on the the latest kernel that's available, or long-term kernel that's available to you, and the system is fully up to date before you install any new application. That's my rule of thumb. But let's go on and install Docker Compose. That's the first app we want to install. So sudo apt install Docker, and the package name is dash compose. So Docker dash compose, and let's press enter. That'll go through and install Docker Compose for us, and then we can continue on with the process. I'll be back when it finishes. All right, cool. So Docker Compose is installed on the system. Now, the next thing we want to do is create the Git user account that we're going to use with our Docker Compose file. That's the actual account that'll be running Forgejo for us on the system. And I already have it written out. I'll just paste it in, and I'll kind of cover exactly what I'm doing. So basically sudo add user, and then shell, so a system shell, bash, we specifying all that, get version control, and disable the password because we don't need a password for this account. It's a systems account. Then it also has a home directory of home git, and then the account name is git. Just wanted to break that down for you guys so you guys can know exactly what we're doing without just pasting something without understanding what it is. So let's go down and press enter, and it's two things you want to pay attention to. I just want to show you guys this, but the two things you want to pay attention to is the group ID, which is 119, and then the user ID. And the reason I say you need to pay attention to it, because it may be different depending on accounts that you have created on your system. So user ID 115, you want to go down and write that down, because that's going to go into our Docker compose file, which is written in a YAML language. I'll cover that a little more later. And then the group ID of 119. And we just want to make sure we remember those, so when we put together our Docker compose file, we'll have the right IDs. All right, cool. So the next thing we want to do is modify the Git account, because we need to add it to a group. We needed to have Docker permissions. So all we have to do is type sudo user mod, and this is a built-in tool, just like the add user tool or utility. This manages users, and it allows you to modify those users that are on the system. So we need the -A and then the capital G for a group. So we want to modify the group. Append group, that's essentially what that command means, or those two options together mean. Append group. And what group we want to add this user to is the next thing. We want to add it to that Docker group, and then the user account that we want to add to that Docker group, which is Git. So we type that at the end of it and press enter, and that will modify that Git account so it has Docker permissions. And then you can check out the groups of any user on the system by just typing groups and then the account information. And I'm just showing you guys so you guys can, I don't know, see some other things that you could do on a Linux operating system in case you need to modify it, and just verify that you have that group added to that user. And as you can see, it's got the user, and then each user that's created, it creates its own group, which is Git. That's why it has the Git user group as well as the Docker user group. So we're good to go with that account. Now within our home directory, let's go down and make a directory. So make directory, and then let's use the tilde for home, which represents our home, /, and then Forgejo. And let's press enter, and that'll create that directory for us. And then let's go into that directory. This is where we're gonna save our Docker compose file. So let's go up into that directory, and let me move the mouse out of the way so you guys can see what I'm doing. But let's go down and type nano or whatever text editor you want to use in order to create this file. It doesn't matter. So you can use Vim, Vi, you know, any other text editor that you feel comfortable with, but I always use nano. It's the easiest and simplest to use. So let's go down and type out the rest of the name of this, but it is a YAML file, and YAML is a programming language that's used with a lot of tools, but Docker, you know, you use it with the Docker compose file. That's how you create those Docker compose files, using the YAML language. Now I want to go through how to write in the YAML language. I already have the configuration written out for us, so I'll paste that into the file, but I'll walk you guys through, you know, certain parts of that file so you guys can understand what it's doing in case you need to troubleshoot it. So as you can see, I pasted it in. So right here is the image. This is the Docker image. So codeberg.org, and then Forgejo, and then Forgejo 1.19.0-2. So in the future, just make sure you put the current version of Forgejo. Now the container name, we're going to name it Forgejo. You can actually name it whatever you want to, but this is that important part I was talking about when we created our accounts. There is a user ID, and basically what this is doing is designating the environment. So you got your user ID, so that's the account that this Docker container will run under. Yeah, we're creating this YAML file under the Josh account, but it will run under that user ID as well as that user group. So 119. So like I said, that's where you want to make sure you write those down. That way when you go in here and paste this configuration in, you modify it to put the correct user IDs and group IDs in there. And then down here, just to break this down, this is the volume. So you got your data area, you got your SSH, time zones, local time, and then this is an important part right here. What we're doing is using the loopback address, and we're using that port of 3000. So after we create this Docker container, it won't be available to the web because we need a web server, which I'm going to show you guys how to set that up. We're going to use NGINX today, but that loopback address, it basically just loops back to itself. So that's essentially what that is, that 127.0.0.1, that's the loopback address. So right now it's not gonna host out the site until we set up a web server. Now let's get to that point and finish this up. So Control S will save out, it'll write out everything, and then Control X will exit out of that file. And so we created our configuration file for Docker, our Docker compose file, and this will cause the system when we run our Docker commands to create that Docker container for us using that account, using that loop back address, as well as the ports that we designated. All right, so within this folder, let's go on and run our Docker command. And all we have to do is type sudo docker -compose, and let me move the mouse out of the way, and then up. And this will cause the creation of the Docker container. So let's go down and press enter. I'm gonna just run it the first time so you guys can see what it'll do, but basically it'll pull down that Docker image. You'll see it pulling from Forgejo. It's pulling that down. And now this is what you're looking for right here. It says creating Forgejo and done. So it created our Docker image and it's actually running, but like I said, you can't connect to it yet because we don't have a web server hosting it out. But the rest of this is somewhat of logs. You'll see where it's listening on port 3000, and then down here you'll see it's listening on port 22. So that lets us know that our Docker compose file was correct. It was 100% correct. It officially created our Docker container and everything is working properly. So we can cancel this out by just typing Control C. That'll actually stop the server. It'll stop the container. And what we want to do is run it using -D at the end of it. And just to explain that, -D stands for detached. That's essentially what it is. So we're going to start that Docker container and leave it up and running, you know, detached. So you won't have to look at those logs. You can go back to doing whatever you want to do on your server, whatever else you need to do on the server, and I'll show you guys that now. So let's go down and press enter. You'll see it'll show one line, which is that starting Forgejo, and then done, and we're good to go. So it's running in the background. You don't know it, but it's running in the background. And just to verify that it's running, we can also run sudo docker -compose, and then it's another option, PS. So if we type PS, that will list out the current running Docker container. So Forgejo is still running, it's up, and here are the ports that it's running on. So port 22, which is that SSH connection, and then the 3000 port connection. And like I said, it's using that loopback address. Now everything with Forgejo is 100% done, so we can get out of this directory that we're in. Let's go back to it and clear the screen. And what I want to do is run through setting up our firewall as well as setting up NGINX right fast. And so first thing you want to do is run sudo apt updates, and this will refresh those repositories again for us. And then let's go down and install NGINX. So let's go sudo apt install NGINX, and I'll be doing this in a different kind of way. I'll be jumping back and forth in between the firewall and the web server, but it shouldn't be too confusing for you guys because it's very simple. All I did was update so far. Let's go down and install NGINX, and shouldn't take too long to get this set up, but NGINX will be up and running. It automatically starts the service as well as enable it, so I'll skip that. The verification of NGINX, I know that it's up. Now let's get to the firewall right fast before we create our configuration files, because we needed NGINX installed in order to open the ports on the firewall. So let's go sudo UFW status, and let's just check the status. We know it's inactive. Ubuntu comes with UFW disabled by default, but what we need to do is go down and open up our ports. So we can type sudo UFW allow, and what we first want to do is open up the ports for SSH, because right now we're connected via SSH, and if you are too, then you want to make sure you open up that port first. So let's go down and add that rule, and then also let's add the rule for NGINX. And The full app is NGINX, and the reason I'm doing full is because it opens up both ports, the 443 port, which is the secure port, as well as port 80, in case you, and then really the 443, I'm only opening it up for people that want to add a cert to the website once it's up, the Forgejo website. So let's go down and press enter. That'll open up the ports for NGINX full, and let's check the status again. Just well, I forgot, it won't show anything yet, but let's go down and activate it. So let's type sudo ufw enable, and this will enable our firewall. And like I said before in the other videos, this will disrupt your SSH connection if you don't have the SSH ports open, which we know that we opened them up. So all we have to do is type Y, press enter, and you'll see that the firewall is active and enabled on startup, system startup, and then plus we are still connected to it. So that lets us know that our ports are open as well, because you could lose connection if you don't open that open SSH port first. Now let's check the status right fast again, just show you guys those ports. Like I said, the NGINX full will open up port 80 and 443, so we got that open, and then we got open SSH, so our connection is good to go. Now let's go down and configure NGINX right fast. And what we need to do is create a NGINX configuration file. So sudo nano, and then the directory is under etc NGINX, or some people call it NGINX. I'm sorry if you cringe because I'm calling it NGINX. That's the way I've always called it. So I can't teach an old dog new tricks. I've been doing it that way, or saying it that way, for a while. So sites dash available, and then let's go down and create us a configuration file for Forgejo. So Forgejo, and then press enter. That'll, and basically what I'm doing is opening up or creating a configuration file by opening it up using our text editor. So let's go and press enter, and I already have our configuration written out for this, but let's go on and paste it in there. And what I'm gonna do is leave it the way it is. It's just a default configuration for it, but what you want to do is put the IP address of the server in here, unless you have a domain name, and that's why I put this in here. So get.example or 4g.example, whatever, that's just example right there, but you need to change this. So let's go down and save the file. Currently it's not going to use it yet, because we still have to test the configuration as well as restart NGINX in order for it to recognize it, as well as link that file, this 4G file, as an active configuration for the server. And the reason I got out of it though, because we need the IP address of the server. So we could type IP in A, that'll give us the server IP address, and what we need is ethos0. Just look for ethos0. That'll give us the IP address of that server. Or we can go back to our website, we can check out our node, and we can find out what the IP address is there. We copy it there as well. Now let's go back to our terminal and open up that configuration file again. And what we want to do is under server name, delete this out, whatever it is, put your domain name, either your domain name, but I'm using the IP address for this example because I don't have a domain tied to this IP address, and it'll take too long to actually do it. But just to break some of this down, localhost, so it's setting up basically a reverse proxy. That's essentially what we're doing to that loopback address, you know, localhost, and then port 3000. So let's go down and press Control S and then Control X. That'll save what we wrote in there, the IP address that we put in there, and save that file for us and close it out. Now let's go down and link that configuration file. I'm gonna press up just to make it quicker, so I ain't got to type all that out. But it's basically sudo ln, which is our link command, and then -s, and then let's go down to the end of it and put the location where we want it. So basically it's under etc NGINX and sites I'm gonna put sites available and then 4G, so I ain't got to type it all out. But what I'm gonna do is go back here, back off available, and what we want to do is put it in enabled directory. So that directory, that's basically what we're doing. We're linking this file under sites available that we created to our sites enabled directory. So quick way of doing it, just press enter, good to go. So we got that linked over there. Now we could test out our configuration. Since it's over there under enabled, we could type sudo NGINX and then -t, and that will test out any configuration files that we got there. So as you can see, the configuration file, NGINX.conf syntax is okay, as well as the other configuration files. And really, it's really not looking at that file yet because it's not active yet, but it's basically checking to verify that the server, all the configuration files are okay. So now all we have to do is type sudo systemctl, and then what we want to do is restart our NGINX server. So let's press enter. So the server is up and running, and our site should be hosted from NGINX. And let's go down and verify that by going back to our website, and then let's copy this IP address. And all we got to do is type in that IP address, boom, and it should bring up the initial configuration for Forgejo. And you got a few options going through the configuration, the basic configuration. So you got your database type. I'm going to use the defaults for everything, but they do have options in here for you. Got MySQL, PostgreSQL. We're going to use SQLite 3, which is the default. The path, you can specify that if you need to. Just leave it at defaults if you really don't understand what you're doing, until you get it to a point where you fully understand what you're doing. You could change up the site title, repository root path, the git lfs root path. You can change that. Run as user git, server domain. Now if you had a domain name in here, you can put that in there. SSH ports, the listing port is 3000. Basically all that, just leave that default. I'll leave a default. And then what you can do is set up email settings. You have that option as well. So if you have an email server or a mail server, and then server, third-party service settings, I won't go through all of that. Just leave the defaults. Now, one thing you want to do is go in here and set the administrator account. And you want to do this right away. You know what I'm saying? This server right now is being hosted on the net, and so anyone has access to it. So if they find this IP address of this server, this will pop up whenever they type it in. Whenever they type in that IP address, you know, they can get right to this site. Or if you have a domain and you changed it to point to this site, this will pop up right away. So you want to do this right away. And what I'm gonna do is just create a simple account. So Josh, and then create a password for it, confirm that password. And let's just put one of my personal email addresses in there. So keep it techie@gmail.com, and go down and press install, and it'll finish the installation of it. And remember that username and password, whatever you set it is. The first account that you create will be the administrative account for the server. So just wanted to, you know, let you guys know that. But as you can see, it'll go through, it'll generate everything it needs for the server in order for it to run properly and get set up for the first time that anyone has logged into it. Now, boom, we are done. This is basically the full setup of Forgejo. You can set up your repositories, you can set up organizations, and with the administrative account, you have a whole bunch of other things you can do. You can go in the site administration. Won't go through all this, but there is a whole bunch of things you can do under the administrative account, which is that first account that you create in order to fully manage the server. And we can go back to our home. You can test it out by typing and creating a repository. I won't do that. I just want to show you guys how to get it up and running. But once you got it up and running, it'll continue in this state. So that's it for this tutorial on installing Forgejo on Ubuntu server using Docker. And I hope you found this tutorial helpful and informative. And by now you should have a fully functioning Forgejo installation up and running on your own server using Linode. As always, thank you so much for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, please check out the Linode community site, which the link will be down in the description of the video. See you guys in the next one. Peace.